Okay, so today we're going to talk about, and I'm going to start to introduce you to the tissues of the human body. Okay, so tissues are the living fabric of the human body. It's where cells come together, and when cells come together, they make tissue, and then tissues then can actually become a multicellular, the cells then can become a multicellular organism, and then we get to produce different types of organs and organ systems. Those cells in a multicellular organism, i.e. humans, do not operate independently or in isolation. Instead, they have to come together to perform particular functions, to be multicellular and make up tissue. And of course, the way it goes, cells make up or come together to make up tissue, tissue make up organs, organs make up organ systems. Okay, so this is the cell, and this is a very generic cell, kind of just to show you everything. We've gone over all of these different things. And how we're going to see is that cells that are specialized come together to make up tissue to perform a very specialized function. And we're going to actually go into talking about those types of specialized functions of those cells and those tissue and how they come together to make up the organ. In lab, we'll spend a lot of time looking at these cells and seeing their how their shapes and their structures relate to their function. So body tissue. Tissues are groups of closely related cells with the similar structure and function. There are four primary tissue types: epithelial, epi. Whenever you see the terminology epi, epi just means top or outside. So here, if we can look, so the Latin terminology for, why am I not moving? For this epi means up or out or up outside. So then we have, and the epithelial is like your skin and their linings. So they're used for protection. Connective is support. It begins to connect different types of tissues, another four types. Nervous is used for control, especially being able to take the external environment and moving it internally. And then muscle, of course, is movement. Movement mainly is used for that response to the environment or response to the inputs coming in from the nervous. And epithelial is protection, and connective connects it all together. Most organs contain several tissue types arranged in the arrangement of the tissues determine the structure and the function of the organ. So remember that when we look at a slide, normally it's a slide of a section of an organ. And just by definition, organs are multiple tissue types. So you can find multiple kinds of these tissues here found within any particular organ. Okay, so epithelial, it's found in the body linings and coverings, different four areas. There can be glandular, and its major functions is for protection, absorption, filtration, and secretion. Protection, of course, like your skin to protect you from the outside, keep you from drying out. Absorption is like the intestines to be able to absorb things into the body. Filtration is where we're going to filter things, like in the kidney where you filter and clean your blood. Secretion is like in either like your stomach where it's going to secrete, or glands where they'll secrete things out into the body for use. So areas where epithelial is found, cover and linings, the surface of the body, the outer surface, uh, deepening into the lining of the openings, cavities, digestive, respiratory. Okay, so anywhere that you have a surface that is exposed to an opening, it's always epithelial. Epithelial is going to line. Nearly all substances received or given off by the body must pass through the epithelial. Glandular epithelial, these are impressions that the glands of the body. So these are forms where of glands where it's internally, and they'll make these little holes where they'll secrete um, hormones into. And we'll talk about glands a little bit later. Four functions of epithelial, again, protection, skin, it's a mechanical, chemical barrier, bacterial barrier, absorption like we find in the digestive tract, kidney is for filtration. They also do protection and absorption. And then secretion like the special glands throughout your body. Characteristics of epithelial. The characteristics of epithelial uh, are they're composed mostly entirely of cells. Epithelial can what's neat about epithelial is it fits very, very close together and tight because it has to be a protective layer, which is very different from our other tissue types, which can spread all over the place. Specialized, it's a continuous sheets can be bound by adjacent cells because they come in lateral contact with each other, so they can come in close contact. The way that these cells come together in contacts, they're called tight junctions, dimnosomes, gap junctions, and which eliminate extracellular waste uh, between cells. Uh, Now, the tight junctions, they are, like they say, tight. They're very tight. They're impermeable. So when you have two cells that are close together and you don't want anything to go in between the cells, you have tight junctions to make it impermeable. Dimnosomes have flexibility, but they usually have, they're like when you form nice sheets of tissue, so they can have some mechanical stress where they can be pulled apart. And gaps junctions allow for communication between cells. So in gap junctions, the actual cytoplasm of one cell becomes continuous with the cytoplasm of the next. So you have a connection between cytoplasm to cytoplasm. So here we can look at the different types of how they go together. So here this shows you, so if you go here to here, these are the tight junctions, and if something was coming into in this direction, you can see that it would be stopped by these tight junctions, which are impermeable. You tend to find these types of impermeable tight junctions when you have the lining of the stomach or the lining of the intestines, where you want to cause any type of digestive particles to actually go through the cell and not between the cells. So you want them to, all of the cell activity to go through the cell and not between the cells. Okay. The next one you have is dimnosomes. Dimnosomes here, dimnosomes, they're used for anchoring, and you can see that if you look very close, that there's the ability of the space between cells. That space between cells then allows for transport of nutrients and fluid between cells in that space. It gives flexibility, it gives anchoring within the cell, and it allows for sheet-like buildings. And then you have the gap junctions. Okay, so gap junctions are found here. And gap junctions allow for the movement of stuff from cell to cell, passing through, and that communication backwards and forwards from cytoplasm to cytoplasm between cells. again, there's this polarity of what we call the epithelial polarity in that always, 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 the epithelial is open to a body surface. So there is tissue below it, but then there's an opening. So like the opening of your stomach. So they have the lining of the stomach or the outside of the stomach where it's open to the abdominal cavity. Your skin is open to the outside environment. The lining of the mouth is open into the opening of your mouth. Uh, in, in your nose. Uh, it's always a lining that has an open surface. In glands, it's a little bit harder to tell, but you have always a small opening in which that all the organ or all the hormones that the gland will produce will go into that little hole, which then will be passed to the circulatory system, and we'll talk about that later. Um, Some exposed surfaces are slick and smooth, while others will exhibit modifications such as microvilli and cilia. Microvilli are going to be found, they're finger-like projections of the cytoplasm. Basically, they increase the surface area for absorption, and you're going to have that in two places, mainly in the small intestines and in the kidney. You're going to find a lot of that. Cilia are hair-like projections, and they're going to have they're like flagella but shortened, and they're mini, and then they are used a lot of times within the line of the epithelial, but they line the trachea to help project things out or protect the lower respiratory tract, your lungs. Another characteristics of epithelial is that they are avascular. Avascular means that they have no blood supply. This is why you can kind of scratch your skin and you really don't bleed because it's avascular. There's the actual vessels that have blood in them are very low, deeper down into the tissue, and then the epithelial is avascular. It's a good protective mechanism so that you can you don't every time you get scratched or anything you don't bleed to death. So it's very avascular, but it has it's very well supplied with nerves. But think about it, your skin is your connection between the outside environment. So in order for that internal environment and the central nervous system to know what's going on the outside, you've got to have this connection, and the skin is that connective connection. Now all of them, again, all cells get nutrients by diffusion from the underlying connective tissue. So that's where how the uh, the epithelial gets its nutrients. Now, characteristics continued. You have a basement membrane. Epithelial has a basement membrane that rests, that all the epithelial cells rest on. It's called the basement lamella, which separates it from the connective tissue. The basal, the basal lamella, which is epithelial, is a non-living adhesive material that formed by glycoproteins, and then you have the reticular lamella, which is connective tissue that connect the two together. The extracellular material that's made up of fine collagenous or reticular fibers that actually connect the two together to make them into a tissue. These two lamellas form what we call the basement membrane. This membrane reinforces epithelials and gives it the stretchability and ability for it not to stretch and not to tear. Regeneration. Skin cells, they are highly regenerative. I mean, you think about how many skin cells you lose on a regular basis. These are highly regenerated. They replace and they rapidly replace as long as there's adequate nutrients. Classification. How do we classify epithelial cells? We classify epithelial cells by their shape and their arrangement of cells, which the arrangement of cells means the number of layers present. Okay? There are three basic shapes. Okay? And the way I usually teach it is that we first start off with cuboidal. Okay? So cuboidal, which is here, is cuboidal, which is a square shape, right? So it's a nice cube, and this is not a plant cell, it's a human cell. The cuboidal cells are they are as tall as they are wide. And so if you take the cuboidal cell and then you stretch it, if you stretch it, you get columnar. And then if you take the cuboidal cell and you squish it, it is squamish. Okay, so if you take a cuboidal cell, cuboidal is the center. It's as wide as it is tall, and then columnar. If you take cuboidal and you stretch it, you get columnar. If you take cuboidal and you squish it like a pancake, you get squamish. Okay, so epithelial cells are irregular, polyhedron in cross-section, but differ in cell heights. Uh, By height, there are three common shapes: squamish, which is flat, scale-like; cuboidal, which is cube, so it is as tall as it is wide; and columnar is taller than it is wide. Now, what's interesting to recognize is that you can help to distinguish which one by looking at the shape of the nucleus. The shape of the nucleus corresponds to the actual shape of the cells. So if you have a squamous cell, the nucleus is kind of squished. Cuboidal is nice and round. Columnar is kind of stretched oval. Layers. You can then look at two major layers. Layers is simple. One is simple. Simple is just a single layer of cells. It could be simple cuboidal, simple columnar, simple columnar. It's just one layer, and each cell is touching the basement membrane. Each cell is touching the basement membrane. This is found in places where you want to have quick diffusion. So one layer thick. I found where where you need absorption and filtration need to occur. Stratified, you can see is like stratified. You have stratified layers, which is just layers upon layers upon layers of skin or epithelium. Stratified with more than one layer is stacked upon each other, typically found in high abrasion areas for protection. Now, again, like your mouth, your lining of your skin, that's stratified. It's got hundreds of little layers of skin, of epithelial cells. Four major classes of simple epithelium. There's simple squamish, simple cuboidal, and simple columnar. Simple columnar may or may not contain cilia. And then we have pseudo-stratified columnar. Pseudo-stratified is one of those weird ones. Pseudo means false, stratified it's false stratifications. So it looks as if it is stratified, but when you closely look at it, it's a single layer of columnar, but they're irregular columnar, and that each cell is actually taking and attaching to the basement membrane. You find that a lot within the trachea. So you have pseudostratified ciliated epithelial, which is found in the trachea. Four major classes of stratified. Stratified squamish, stratified columnar, stratified cuboidal, and what we call transitional epithelial. Transitional epithelial is stratified, and they have multiple different types of shapes. And transitional is usually found in like bladders, places where the bladder is an organ in which it just holds something, like the urinary bladder. And if you think about the urinary bladder, over time it fills up and stretches and then it empties. It fills up and stretches. So it has this continual change in shape. And that change in shape causes this transitional shapes. So it can go from being like cuboidal and transition into squamous and so on and so on. So this is what we call transitional. So classification of epithelia by cell type and arrangement reveals nothing about the tissue's body location, because these things can be found all over. So now what I'd like you to do is, in your notes, what I want you to do is to go ahead and make a table with the four simple and stratified epithelials, so 4 major simple and stratified epithelials, include columns and for descriptions and locations and functions. And that it will end our first video.